this is not just about prior conduct. It's not just about, although it would be more than enough, the president's inviting Russia to interfere, then trying to coerce Ukraine to interfere. It is about what is going on today as the president and his allies continue to try to invite foreign interference in our election. It never stopped. It never will stop unless we put an end to it. And so this is a continuing risk to our democracy.
And you can apply that standard right now. What was Donald Trump doing today? Well, the answer is meeting with his lawyer/Ukrainian fixer, who is brazenly continuing to seek this investigation or dirt on Trump's opponents, which is, of course, what got Donald Trump so close to impeachment in the first place. This morning, Giuliani meeting with the president at the White House, while the House Judiciary Committee approved those 2 articles of impeachment. Giuliani also fresh off a trip back to Ukraine, where he pushed debunked conspiracy theories. The Wall Street Journal reporting when Giuliani returned to New York last Saturday, the president called him as his plane was still taxiing down the runway. And Giuliani said, according to Giuliani, and then the question was, what did you get? Mr. Trump asked. More than you can imagine, Mr. Giuliani replied. The same day, President Trump spoke highly about Giuliani's efforts in Ukraine.
Well, I just know he came back from someplace and he's going to make a report, I think, to the Attorney General and to Congress. He says he has a lot of good information. I have not spoken to him about that information.
And despite being under federal investigation over whether he failed to register as a foreign agent, among other inquiries, the Journal also reports Giuliani's expanded his search for information about Burisma beyond Ukraine to Latvia, where the gas company had bank accounts, and Cyprus, where it's formally registered. We turn now to someone who's covered Rudy Giuliani closely, Clyde Haberman, longtime columnist for the New York Times. He's got a new piece out in BuzzFeed, Ask Any New Yorker. Rudy Giuliani was always this bad. Clarity, an important thing in headlines. Also back with us, former federal prosecutor Joyce Vance. Before I get to the New York history, I go right to you, Joyce, on the legality. Obviously, Mr. Giuliani is unbowed by this investigation as he continues. Do you see legal problems for him here?
Yeah, you know, this is incredible for so many reasons. Giuliani is not a federal employee. He doesn't operate under any of the federal ethics laws. He's just off freelancing for the president in a foreign country, doing work that we would normally expect maybe the Justice Department to be doing or some other legitimate government agency. So that, I think, is problematic. The source of Giuliani's payment always has remained a mystery. We know from a New York Times story today that the government didn't disclose any sort of free legal work, and yet he's not paying Giuliani. So the question is, who is? We know that he was working with Lev Parnas, who received at least $1 million payment from Russian sources. So there's a lot of murkiness there. The real question, though, Ari, is would this Justice Department hold Giuliani accountable for wrongdoing if, in fact, that evidence came to light in the course of their investigation? Yeah,
and that is a big question. I turn now here in New York to Clyde. Nice to see you this evening.
Nice to be here.
As I watch Giuliani go back to Ukraine and Kiev, I'm reminded of another New York poet, the late, great, notorious B.I.G. You remember him?
Yeah, I do.
Who said going back to Kiev in this instance. And I want to read from your article, which looks at Giuliani as a New York figure. You say this is how it's always been. The reality, as clear-eyed New Yorkers can tell you, this is the same tower of truculence Giuliani has always been, a kiss-up, kick-down kind of guy, fittingly described by Jimmy Breslin as a small man in search of a balcony.
Yeah, well, that's basically it. Nothing has really changed. Yeah, he enjoyed a good period right after the September 11th, 2001 terror attack. But in truth, his MO has always been to throw dirt on opponents, to cast them as morally deficient somehow, if not outright corrupt and evil. And can I say, this business where he's saying to the president, you know, we're finding more than you can imagine, it's very, very Trumpian. You may remember that when Trump was going after Obama and this nonsense about Obama not having been born in the United States, he supposedly had investigators out all over the world to find Obama's true origins. And he said, you know, they can't believe what they're finding. A classic Trump line. I can't believe what they're finding. nobody sensibly believes that they found anything, or even if these investigators existed. And so now suddenly we're hearing almost the exact same language, more than you can imagine. I don't believe it. And as far as, the history, there's some terrible things that he did to people. In that article, I recall one in particular. There was a fellow named Patrick Dorisman who was coming out of a bar in Midtown Manhattan, and a team of New York City undercover cops looking to make arrests approached him and asked him if he knew where they could buy marijuana. I guess Dorisman may have been a bit of a hothead. He took offense. One thing led to another. There was a scuffle. The next thing you know, the cop had a gun out, his undercover cops, and Dorisman was lying dead on the pavement. What Rudy Giuliani did almost immediately with his then police commissioner, Howard Safir, ethically suspect, if not technically illegal, was that Dorisman did have a juvenile delinquency record. They opened up this juvie record to show that he was not, in Giuliani's word, an altar boy. Well, in fact, Dorisman had been an altar boy. In fact, he'd even attended the same Catholic school that Giuliani once had done. But this is the modus operandi of this guy for his entire career. It's besmirch where you have to, and just let the dirt fall where it may.
And you think, briefly, that he and Trump have, in your view, a kindred spirit in that ugliness?
Absolutely. I mean, it's always combative. It is always the world's against us. It's taking credit for things that you never did. Again, in that article, in 1994, his first year in office, he gave a speech in Washington in which he claimed credit for having rid the city of graffiti-scarred subway cars. The last graffiti-scarred subway car was taken out of service nearly 5 full years before he even became mayor. And this goes on.
Right. You're talking about the combination of being fact-free, having a mean streak, abusing power, and you combine that all together, working for Donald Trump, and you say it's a dangerous brew. Whether or not it's going to be held accountable in the very office he used to run is one of the big questions hanging over, not over New York these days, as you know, but probably the nation. Clyde Haberman, a longtime New York Times legend. Nice to have you in our studio.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Appreciate it.